Okay. Well, welcome to the February 2024 Branch Development Committee Peer Group Meeting. We're excited to see you all here. Peer group meetings are a monthly program for branch leaders, including presidents, presidents-elect, program chairs, membership chairs, nominating committee members, and others who are interested. I'm Sigrid Morans, AEW California Director for Leadership Development. The other branch development leadership team members are Marcia Swales, AEW California Director for Membership, Sharon Siebert, AEW California Director for Branch Support, and of course, Peggy Chippen, who's on our committee and has done most of the work here for finding and engaging our speaker, Barry Atlin. And thank you, Peggy, for your help. But first, we have a couple of announcements. If you have not yet submitted your branch activity of the year award program, the deadline is Friday, March 1st. So please go to the AEW California website and under branch tools, scroll down to the branch activity of the year to find the submission forms. And you can also see samples of past winners, but be sure to get your branch the recognition it deserves and get it submitted by March 1st. Sharon will put a link for that into the chat where you can copy it. Also, it's election time. Please consider submitting your name for one of the 5 openings on the AEW California Board of Directors. Directions for sending in your nomination and to see who's also running, go to the AEW California site, and under California Business, you can see the site called Nominations and Elections. The site will be in the chat box. As this is going to be an interactive session, we want to hear from all attendees. So be sure to familiarize yourself with the reactions mode at the bottom of your screen to activate your raise your hand. Does everybody know where that is? At the bottom, there's a thing called reactions. And if you click on it, there's a thing right above it that says raise your hand. And then you raise your hand. And then you lower your hand when you're finished speaking. And that'll help move you to the top of the page so that we can see you when you have a question. The session's being recorded, and it'll be available in a few days on the AEW California website. We have topics scheduled through May of 2024, and we'll put our website in the chat, and it has our schedule as well as links to all of the past month's recordings. So I'd like to introduce Peggy, and she's going to introduce Barry. Peggy.
Hey. Well, welcome to the February 2024 Branch Development Peer Group Meeting. Thank you so much for coming tonight to hear our guest speaker and facilitator, Barry Atlin, discussing the first of a 3-part series entitled Touching the Heart of Our Volunteers. This first session, our guest facilitator, Barry Atlin, will lead us in an interactive discussion focusing on the needs and desires of volunteers as key to keeping their passion fires burning and inspiring potential future leaders. Barry Atlin is the author of the acclaimed book titled Engaging the Head, Heart, and Hands of a Volunteer. Barry has extensive experience as a volunteer and executive leader in a variety of nonprofit organizations and applied his unique experience to craft leadership guidance for all phases of volunteer engagement cycle: attraction, discovery, engagement, sustaining, and redirection. We hope that you can join your peers for an immersive learning conversation of ideas and successes. Welcome, Barry.
It is my pleasure to be here with all of you. Peggy, thank you so much, and Sigrid, and for all of those who have had the chance to spend time with and part of the planning. It's really been an exciting journey to learn about all of the amazing work that all of you do. So if you'll allow me, I'm going to share screen. And I also want to, as I do that, just give you a few thoughts, share a few thoughts with you that are going to help us to have a fruitful evening together. Let me get my screen set up here. By the way, in my home office here, you are right here because I'm looking at my camera right now. I have a ring light right above it. I have a screen to my right, which is where my content is. And then I have a large screen, in fact, a large flat screen to my left, which is where all of your faces are if you are on camera. And it does look that about half of the group is on camera. If the rest of you feel comfortable in joining us, I always welcome everybody who feels comfortable to join us on camera. So it almost feels like we're in the same room together. I've spent a lot of time in this virtual space, and I do know that when we choose to be wholly present and on camera, and we get to see each other's faces and hear each other's voices, that it really does feel like we're in the same room together. So we're going to do our best to replicate that this evening. Sigrid had mentioned that you can use your digital hand raise. If you are on camera and you don't know how to do that digital hand raise, you know, the old-fashioned hand being raised actually works pretty well as well. If you just want to kind of give it a little wave, I'm sure that I will see you out of the corner of my eye, and we can spotlight your video should you have a response to a question, or better yet, should you have a question to ask. One more note that I would like to ask is if you have a way of taking notes, maybe a piece of paper and a pen that's nearby, maybe there'll be some thoughts that are worthy of jotting down. And I may even ask you to just write a thing or two down that you would then be able to share more easily. So you can just read what you wrote as opposed to coming off the cuff. So with that in mind, let's dive in. I am curious to get our conversation started. Again, if you need a moment to think about this, then take that moment. But I'm curious, why do you choose? Why do you choose to serve in the role where you serve with AAUW? And if that answer comes to mind immediately and someone is willing to share, would love to hear it. If you need a moment to think about it or maybe even write an answer down, please do so. Who'd like to share their why just to get our conversation started? Yes, that silence is awkward, isn't it? I see Sandra. Hi, Sandra. I'm going to spotlight your video. Take yourself off of mute and share your why. Let's take yourself off of mute.
Okay, I just unmuted.
There you
Okay.
go.
When my dad died, and there was a receiving line for people at the funeral home, a man came up to my sister and me and introduced himself, and he said that he was in this senior men's group. And the reason that he joined the group was because when he went to the first meeting, he met my father, and my dad was the president of the group at the time. And I didn't know that. I never knew that he was in that group or that he was the president. And the first thing that popped in my head was, oh, that's where I get it from. My mother was not a volunteer, but my dad volunteered to coach baseball because he had two daughters who didn't like baseball. So he volunteered to coach, I guess, Police Athletic League or whatever group it was. But I think the biggest thing for me is that I contribute to my community. And I was at a board meeting years ago, and after the meeting portion, we were talking about things that we were doing, and a number of the women also volunteer with other organizations in the community. And all I could think of was I surround myself with good women. or good people. And I think that's it. I've met wonderful people, and so yeah, I contribute as a volunteer, but I get something out of it too.
Oh, Sandra, again, as you talk about how you choose to serve in your community and you give to get, but then you get to give as well. We'll be touching on that concept. I love to hear that. Thank you so much for getting our conversation started. And it looks like Stephanie would like to share as well. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Well, I agree with some of the same motivations that the previous speaker did. I moved to this county after I retired, and I didn't know anyone here, so I needed to get involved. And I had been in AEW in previous couple of different times, and so that was one of the first things that I joined. And I really like volunteering. I like being involved. I get something out of that. I like to use my skills in a way that's productive and positive. And so organization, for instance, I was a project manager basically. So I can do stuff and organize things and produce things. So that's why I got involved, and I made a lot of friends, made connections to the community and connections to the women that I serve with. And it gives me a lot of satisfaction.
Isn't it amazing how easily those why responses come out of us when we're asked that question? Gail, what would you share?
It just seemed to be a natural progression. I belong to an virtual or online branch, you would call it. We only meet online. So we have no physical, we're all over the United States, and I did program and then I did something else, and it was just a natural progression. And because I tend to be outgoing. I'm a red personality, if you know the personality colors, and outgoing, and so it fell into place and worked, and it is very enjoyable to organize things and hopefully inspire people to do good things for women and children and things we do. So there you go.
Yeah, Gail, again, I am more a fan of the DISC behavioral styles profile, but I'm also familiar with those colors that you're referring to. Fantastic. Very good. And then Peg, you would like to share as well.
Yeah, action cures depression. So when you look at something in the world and it needs to change, just being upset by it doesn't help. But I know that also change needs dedication and commitment. And this organization has been committed since 1881, and they're not afraid of the long haul. So it's a great place to be.
Fantastic. Again, as you hear from 4 of your peers, what it reminds me of is that every one of you has an answer to that question. That what is your why? Why do you choose to serve in this meaningful way that you do? And what you were hearing, if you were listening closely, is that your peers were sharing their motivations. And I do want to use their sharing as a segue to just spend a moment talking about motivation, because it really is the core. It's the foundation of the work that I've done over the last 10 plus years. And I also believe, and I'm going to make a bold statement here, that motivation may be one of the most misunderstood concepts in leadership in the United States today. Certainly in all of my time, I'm 57 years old, so all of my time in my corporate life, as well as in my nonprofit life, I have found that very few or a low percentage actually understand this concept. So let's spend a few minutes talking about motivation. And I want to simplify it for you. So there are only 2 types of motivation that exist. And I'm curious, who would like to share their understanding of those 2 types of motivation? Who knows what they are? And I see Diane waving at me. See, Diane, proving that the the good old-fashioned hand in the air works very well. Go ahead, Diane.
I think the two types are to get something or to avoid something.
Ah, okay. All right. Moving in the right direction. I like the way that you're thinking there. Let's build upon that just a bit more. Who else has a thought? Who else has a thought on the two types of motivation? Yes, and I see Ruth's hand. Ruth, hi, go ahead.
I would say it's either giving or taking.
All right. And again, what we're learning right now is that this is a good idea for us to just spend a few minutes on this topic just to provide a bit more clarity, because I know that all of you serve in leadership roles. And I see Joanne as well. Go ahead, Joanne. What's your thought on that?
Well, what I've always been taught, working with schools, is that there's intrinsic and extrinsic motivation.
Ah, all right. So now we're moving in an interesting direction. Those are two fancy words, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So Joanne, and I added Dawn into our conversation here as well. How comfortable might you feel defining the difference between those two different types of motivation for our peers in the room?
Well, when you work with young children, you start with extrinsic, such as giving them an eraser when they do a good job, something that is motivating them to become more intrinsically involved in learning. So extrinsic is a reward, and intrinsic is what rewards turn into when you accept those rewards and you appreciate them. I think.
Yeah, go ahead, keep going.
No, that's it.
All right, I love what you're sharing. Dawn, again, don't know if it brought you in and you were going to say something similar, but what is your understanding of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation?
Well, I was going to offer the terms internal and external, which are similar.
Same thing, yeah.
But Joanne said it far better than I. But I think that when you are extrinsically motivated, when we work with volunteers, we need to work on internal motivation, because we don't have the external motivation to leverage them with salary jobs and those sorts of things. We have to motivate them internally. We have to make it valuable to them and rewarding to them to continue to volunteer. And I think that is truly an art. It's very easy to motivate people externally with rewards, or shall we say money, and coin of the realm. And we have to figure out a new coin of the realm for internal motivation for volunteers. That's all I was going to say.
Yeah, well, that was quite a bit, and I'm so grateful that you shared.
It always is.
So Dawn, I'm going to take everything that you just shared and I'm going to embrace it with the exception of one thing, and I want to massage it just a little bit, just so that we enhance the understanding for all of our peers. So here's the way that I explain the difference, and hopefully it allows more of us to just really latch on to these two different types. Intrinsic motivation was, if we were listening closely to the way that your peers answered the why question, they were sharing their intrinsic motivation. They were sharing what matters to their heart, what really stirs within them, their needs, their wants, their desires, their passions, their skills, and all of these parts of our whole self that are wrapped up, that define who we uniquely are. That is our intrinsic motivation. In contrast, our extrinsic motivation, an extrinsic type of motivation, is an effort that is made by somebody else to get us to do what they want us to do. And I'll say that again. Extrinsic motivation is an effort made by somebody else to get us to do what they would like us to do. So they would have to apply extrinsic motivation. And Dawn was mentioning money as one example, and it's a really good example, but it's not the only example. That is how extrinsic motivation works. And so the one part of what Dawn shared that I want to massage is that we must intrinsically motivate others. She was using children in the example right there. That's the part that I want us to massage our understanding, because we do not need to intrinsically motivate others. Others are already intrinsically motivated. There is something that stirs inside every one of your hearts. When you were hearing those why questions answered, that was intrinsic motivation at work. We were hearing what those intrinsic motivators are. And I've been on a crusade now for nearly 10 years to share this message, to really get leaders in all types of organizations, specifically volunteer-supported organizations, to let go, maybe rethink our traditional notions on leadership. And as gorgeous of a painting I believe that this is, and I did recently visit Philadelphia, and I don't know if it's the original or a copy, but I did see this painting in larger than life size. And again, I'm just so struck by it, but yet I also recognize that it is patriotic propaganda, and it is made for us to think about leadership in very traditional ways. And instead, I'm going to show you an image in just a bit that really reflects my view on leadership, that's in stark contrast to this traditional view. But I'm going to echo what we heard from your peers, from Dawn and from others, in that when you have paid professional work, and certainly most of us come from that environment where we're driven by need to work, and therefore it is perfectly acceptable for us as leaders to place the needs of the organization first. However, when we're working with unpaid volunteers who have these intrinsic motivators stirring in their hearts, they're driven by choice. Volunteers choose to serve alongside our organizations. And I boldly suggest that instead of putting the needs of the organization first, that maybe we as leaders, that we look at every one of our volunteers and we place their unique individual needs first, only slightly above the organizational needs. And here is what I've seen that happens when we choose to do that. When we choose to place those individual needs and we take care of the heart of our volunteer, and then we get out of their way and let them do amazing work where they apply their gifts, skills,
Alexa, what's notification?
and their talents. When we allow them to do that and serve the organization at their best, they actually serve the organization at a much higher level than they would if we just had taken traditional approaches with them. So again, just helping us to understand, how does that intrinsic motivation work? And I do agree with Dawn's statement that in the volunteer space, intrinsic motivation is way more impactful. It has greater power to drive performance of our volunteers. And then here is my image. Here is my image that I believe captures my view on leadership in a way like no other image has. So I'm curious, what do you see in this image that speaks to leadership? What do you see? I would like to share a thought. Stephanie, go ahead.
What I see is what I'm seeing is what I think of as the mother duck herding her chicks along. She's pushing them or encouraging them to move forward without dragging them or being in front. She's behind.
And what might be the advantage for this mama duck in this case to be behind the ducklings?
She can keep track of things pretty well, I think, because she's looking ahead and looking at all of her ducklings. But I guess that's really it. as opposed to hoping they're blindly, moving forward and then everybody else is blindly following you, assuming that everybody's following you.
Yeah, I'd like to think that the mama duck in this case is, she has a long-term goal in mind for those ducklings. What do you think it might be?
Survival.
To get from point A to point B.
Well, certainly, yeah, that would be the short-term goal, is to get where their destination might be. I think in terms of independence or interdependence. I also think about trust, that there's a certain level of trust in allowing the ducklings to go out ahead of the mama duck in this case. And for me, this image just speaks to leadership in this enlightened way, in this 21st century way, that I have these high hopes that we are evolving to ever so slowly as a society. And we're recognizing that when we lift up the unique gifts and talents of individuals and we give them the freedom to run with those talents, that amazing things happen. Amazing things happen. So here's one more thing that I notice when I look at this image. I look at the heads of the ducklings. And what do we see about the heads of the ducklings in this photo? Ruth, is that a hand? Yeah, go ahead, Ruth.
They're looking straight ahead.
In a common direction.
Yes.
How does that happen?
Because they have support and trust from the mother.
Yeah, those are wise words that you're sharing with your peers. And again, I like to share this image in the hopes that it gets us to begin to think about our leadership roles within your organization a little bit differently, and see that maybe, just maybe, there's a place that we could go to where all of our volunteers feel this sense of enrichment and fulfillment throughout their entire volunteer engagement cycle. So I do talk about those 5 phases of that cycle being attraction and discovery, and we're just going to talk about those first 2. But those 2 phases then lead to engagement and sustainment, and eventually redirection. Although we would hope, and certainly what I'm gathering from my interactions with all of you already, is that redirection may come years and years from now. And for me, that sustainment, seeing how long we can stretch the engagement, we can make sure that these experiences that volunteers have continue to feed their soul, that they will stay and choose to serve and serve with great passion for a really long period of time. Not just out of a sense of duty, but because it brings them this fulfillment in a way that no other paid work could. So as we talk more about this engagement life cycle, I do want to think about, let's just think about the first phases, attraction and discovery, because I'm hoping that you're thinking already, okay, Barry, I think I know where you're headed here. I understand what you've shared so far, but give me something real. Give me something real that I could put into action, maybe even when I'm at a future convening or an event. So I came up with this model when I was writing the book because I was involved with a professional association for a number of years. And I had sketched out this model only because I had seen these interactions that attempt to, and I'm going to use a hard word that I actually use it a lot in my own professional life, when others try to recruit a volunteer. I use the word attraction as opposed to recruitment, and in my writing, I even differentiate between the two. But let's just think about, you're trying to attract a volunteer. So typically what that looks like from a leadership perspective, imagine you're at an event and you're just aware, you're seeking connection with others, you interact with others, and then as you do, you tune in to what they share, and you get what I call a whiff of interest. There's potential interest in getting more deeply involved with the organization. And that is usually the moment where the conversation goes sideways from my observations. And who's feeling that they want to just be honest in this moment and say, oh yeah, I've been in that situation and I didn't quite know how to navigate it. So here's what I did. Who would like to share? Because I know I've done it in the past and then I learned from it and I learned a different way. But who'd like to share in that moment where you think somebody might be interested? What do we tend to do? Who has a thought?
Wanted to see what time I should arrive for Easter dinner on Sunday. And
All right. Sandra, come on in. Go ahead.
I think we see somebody who may be interested and we become a little too aggressive in getting them involved.
Yes, Sandra, thank you for your honesty there. I have seen this interaction. I've witnessed it over and over again, where the individual, Sandra, I've labeled it with 2 words. They drop into tell and sell. And that's typically what we do is like, oh, let me tell you about all of the wonderful things that you will enjoy when you choose to volunteer through this organization. And we begin selling this idea to them. And here's what I encourage leaders to do instead. And it's in the middle of that conversation, Sandra, I call it the flip. And instead of dropping into tell and sell mode, we instead flip the conversation around in that moment. And instead of telling them what we think they will gain, we instead ask them what they would like to gain from potentially getting more involved. And there's a host of questions that could be asked in those moments. So let's do some real-time skill building right here. And I'm curious, what question, if you found yourself in that circumstance, and you did actually flip the conversation around, what question did you ask of that other person? And you may verbalize it. If you want to type it into the chat box, we can share that as well. But who would like to share? What is their question that they may have asked in that moment? Sigrid. Yes. Hi, go ahead.
So I guess the better question would be, what brought you to us? What do you know about us? Why do you find us interesting? And then be quiet.
And why would you suggest to be quiet?
To listen to the answer and not step over people every time they say something. Don't react. Just wait, because you'll hear more.
Be a listening leader in that moment.
Right.
And just absorb what they share and learn from them, because what they're likely going to begin sharing with you are what, Sigrid? Going back to our original concepts. What do you think they're eventually going to share with you that's in there?
What they thought they could bring to the organization. And the things that
yes. Go ahead. Keep going.
And the things about us that they liked, because usually they come to us either through a referral of a current member or on our website, and they see all the things we're doing, and they want to be a part of that. It may not be exactly what they want to do, but they want to participate in something that has that same goal and mission that they want.
Very good. Very good. Yes. And we would hope that also what we're hearing from them are their intrinsic motivators. They're sharing what's in their heart by answering those open-ended questions. And you gave us 3 brilliant examples right there, Sigrid, of open-ended questions where that's exactly what we do is we drop those open-ended questions into the conversation, and then we simply stop talking. And we listen and we learn from that volunteer in that moment about what's important to them, in the hopes that we're gaining insight. We're gaining insight about what they might like to do, because this is what I believe is the magic moment. The magic moment is when you start to learn about the intrinsic motivation of others. And when you are helping them in the leader in your organization, helping them as the leader to get aligned with doing something that fills their soul in some way, that meets those needs and wants and desires that they have, then we're doing something meaningful, both for that individual and for our organization. So that's really the key. The key in this leadership perspective is to find out what's going on in here by asking those open-ended questions, by flipping the conversation around. And when we discover what's going on in the hearts of others, it equips us much better to get them aligned with doing something that brings meaning to them. So I'm going to stop for a moment, and I'm just curious, what questions come to mind about the concepts that we've shared so far? I'm wide open to any question.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. I'm just opening up the floor to any thoughts or any questions that come to mind right now based upon what we've talked about so far. And if you see me looking to my left, I'm looking at all of your faces over here on my flat screen TV. Are there any questions or comments in the chat box that we could share at this time?
There weren't any questions on other than what question are, my favorite question is, what are you reading?
Ah, okay. Very good.
That's
Another
what
good
someone
example.
brought up.
Yes, of an open-ended question, another good example. Well, then I'll ask the group. So I would imagine that many of you have found yourself in that circumstance. What if you began learning more about that potential volunteer? And maybe they gave you a why or what they hope to gain from a volunteer experience. And you thought, well, wow, that was awfully focused on you, the individual, and not necessarily focused on the greater we or altruistic. And I did some study on this when I was writing 10 years ago. And what I learned is that by dictionary definitions, they place these concepts of selfishness and altruism as though they're polar opposites on a continuum or on a spectrum. And I found that fascinating because in the volunteer engagement space, I don't find the selfishness motive and the altruistic motive to be on opposite ends of the spectrum. In fact, I think that they could peacefully coexist at any place on that spectrum. And the truth is that every one of us has both selfish and altruistic drivers within us. In fact, if you were listening closely at the beginning of our group conversation, when we had several of our peers share their why, I know that Sandra stepped up and others, and what I was hearing in the midst of those why responses is a mix a mix of both needs that are very centered on us and then needs that are centered on others or on the community. And here's been my recommendation for leaders is embrace them all. Do not, or try to be careful to not rule somebody out because you think that their response is more centered on self than it might be on others. I have worked with some volunteers who have performed at stellar levels, exceptional levels, because I knew that they were in job seeker mode, or they were looking to build their resume, or they were new to a community and they just wanted to get out and meet people. There could be a number of drivers that we might consider selfish at first blush, but what those intrinsic motivators can do is they can compel a volunteer to perform at a really high level. So I just suggest for leaders to not rule out individuals, but just to understand. Try to find out what it is that those intrinsic motivators are, not to rule them out, but to just embrace whatever they are. Their answer to that why question, it is the right answer because it's their answer. So again, just planting seeds. What I hope to do in our follow-up conversations is I hope to be able to explore some more specific scenarios, be able to talk about some skills that leaders can implement to be able to help this culture to come alive in their organizations. And you begin to embed these practices from the attraction phase all the way through engagement and sustainment. And hopefully, after many, many, many years later, that eventual redirection is long delayed because you're providing this fulfilling space for your volunteers to become actively engaged in doing something that brings significance to them. So again, I'll stop and see if there's any thoughts or questions that come to mind or anything that you would like to bring up based upon these notions.
I'd like to mention that there is a question in the chat. What motivates you to join AAUW? That was another question. And then the other one was, what career do you or did you have?
And Sharon, I thank you for mentioning that and whoever shared that question. Although on that second one that you mentioned, let me offer a caveat. And I love to tell this story because when I was working in homeless outreach in my own community here in Winter Garden, Florida, a number of years ago, I had an episode one day that brought to light this counsel, this advice, that when you ask somebody what they do in their current career or what they have done in their past career, be careful not to automatically assume that the role that they would like to perform in a volunteer capacity is in some way aligned with what they've done in their career life. And I've seen this in organizations like, oh, you work in finance, you're going to be our treasurer. And maybe that person is not interested in serving as the money person for the organization because they get their fill of it in their professional life. So we want to be careful about that. So here's the story is I was working in homeless outreach and I would have these conversations with our volunteers. Many of them were recurring volunteers, longtime dedicated volunteers. Others were episodic volunteers. They would come in for a day or maybe for a few weeks stretch, and then they would roll out and others would arrive. But I was trying to figure out of the options that were available on that day, which this one particular volunteer would like to serve. And her response to me was interesting in that she said, I am willing to do whatever the organization needs me to do. But please, oh please, do not make me work with those children over there. was her response. Now, what do you think this person did as a profession?
Teacher.
Shout it out.
Teacher.
She was a teacher.
Yes. So I'm hearing it. So I always remember that moment. It's not that she disliked children. It's just that she wanted her volunteer experience to be different than her professional experience. So I just share that story to remind us all not to automatically assume, but again, engage in the conversation, ask the open-ended questions, get to know what's going on in the heart of every volunteer, and help them to get aligned with doing something that's going to bring them significance in their volunteer life, even if it's something very different than in their professional life.
So Barry, in the chat,
Yes.
there was a question that sounded really good to me. What volunteer involvement have you had in the past? Why did you choose that group?
We're hearing some really good examples of open-ended questions that are perfect to ask in that flip moment. That moment when we're flipping the conversation around and we're making the conversation all about that unique individual, not about the organization. There'll be plenty of time to talk about all the amazing things that we do as an organization. But in that moment, you flip and you make the conversation be about the individual. So Sharon, those are two more excellent examples. Hopefully your peers are writing these examples down so that they're available and they can appear as though they come off the cuff in those moments when we get to ask them and find out more. Find out more about what stirs in the heart of those individuals. So I'm going to take a somewhat dichotomous approach right here as we think about the difference between traditional and enlightened leadership. And those are the words that I use. You may talk about 21st century leadership. You can think about this evolving definition of leadership in a lot of different ways. But here are the words that I've put against it. I have in my corporate life, I've certainly worked with command and control leaders. I've also had the blessing of working with leaders who equip and guide and support and inspire. And I do recommend that we embrace the latter. And it's tough. It's tough because I know for many of us that it's been impressed upon us through our years of experience that traditional style leadership, that's what gets business done. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's true in some business, but certainly when it comes to engaging our volunteers, here is a quote that I learned in my college years by somebody who was a few years ahead of me. And this was so profound that it has stuck with me for the rest of my life. And I want to share it with all of you because it's an important concept for us to keep in mind as leaders. People tend to support that which they have helped create. So I want you to absorb those words for a moment and tell me, what is your understanding of that phrase? What does that mean to you? Would love to hear from several of you. What do those words mean to you? People tend to support that which they have helped create. Yeah, I'm letting the silence linger again. Peggy,
Usually when they,
let's do Rolly and then we'll go to Peggy. Is it Raleigh? Raleigh or Rolly?
Rolly.
Rolly.
I think if we set up an environment where we're always telling people what to do, then they have not had the pleasure of having the ownership of what has been done. And so in future, they will be less willing to run with it. Whereas if it was their idea that was implemented, then they will stay with it longer and help to support it.
Rolly, you speak beautiful words. Yes, absolutely. And Peggy, what would you add to that?
Oh, I was just going to say from personal experience, it just seems like if I'm excited about something and I can just be a part of contributing to it and it kind of takes off or works, then I'm really more excited to spend more time on it. And then I know with AAUW that's happened sometimes, and I'm willing to jump into something new another time when that program ends, or if I move and join a different branch. It just is contagious. It seems really nice.
So
Yeah.
Barry, in the chat,
Yeah,
there's
go ahead.
also a couple of comments.
Yes.
Ownership of a concept or a program. And a second comment that is rather pithy. It explains to me why some newcomers have a hard time joining and supporting a long-standing organization that is already set up.
Yeah, yes, and the organization may be long-standing and have served for many, many years, but yet there's always opportunities for new ideas and new initiatives and new and novel ways to approach the work, even if it's work that we've been doing for many, many years. And I know in that traditional view, and I've encountered this before, and I'm of that cut where I do like to be an innovator. I do like to get my hands dirty and get involved in the exciting work of creation. I know that if somebody else cooked up the idea and then they just handed it to me for implementation, that's not quite as exciting to me because they're still trying to sell the concept to me. They're trying to gain my proverbial buy-in. And here's what I've learned is that when you allow others to be part of the creation of an idea, that you don't need to gain their buy-in. They're already bought in. They already have that sense of ownership, as Rolly was sharing in her response. And for me, that's a beautiful place for an organization to be. People tend to support that which they have helped create. If we can include more in the creation of ideas, then we don't need to sell them on the implementation of it. They're all ready to go. They're ready because they were part of creating it. And again, just words that I know have been profound for me in my professional life. And maybe, just maybe they'll have a little influence in shifting the way that you think about your role as a leader as we move forward. So
here's a concern that has been raised.
Yes.
But there is a difference between leadership roles and programs/activities. So how do you address that?
And tell me more about what that means so I can
I don't know. That's somebody else who feels perhaps that person will tell you.
Well, I'll take a stab at what I think the question might mean. I'm going to interpret that when you are using the word leadership, you may be thinking of a titled leader. And I don't necessarily restrict my definition of leadership to titled leaders, but I think of anybody who is doing the good work of an organization and certainly influencing through their good work that they are a leader in that organization. And that could even be the programs or the activities person who is functioning as a leader, even if they don't have a formal title that accompanies that leadership influence. So Hedda, I see your hand. What would you like to share to the conversation?
So a long time ago, I'm a 50-year member of Sacramento Branch. Somebody said, well, you know, why don't we organize some neighborhood coffees? So I take the directory and I look at where people are living and we organize the neighborhood coffees. Next thing I knew, I was membership. And then I became president, and have done that 3 times. And now I'm program. I think we get people hooked on AAUW or any organization because of what we do, and then they evolve and go into the leadership roles. And one of the things that AAUW Sacramento has tried to do is write job descriptions. And I don't think it's a job. I think it's a leadership role, and these are the responsibilities. You're not being paid. Nobody's telling you what to do, but this is what's expected of you. I mean, I think this is a different level than what you're talking about, but we're looking for people to be the leaders of our branches. And I think I've seen several names on the roster of people I've known from the 80s. Hello there. We need to figure out how to get a younger bunch of folks in, and we need to attract them with things that they're interested in.
Yeah,
so that's it.
Well, and Hedda, I'm so glad that you mentioned this, because my question is, who are the creators of the culture in your organization? Well,
Right.
they are the
And that's a
people
good
who are-
question.
yeah, they're the people who are most actively involved. So again, they could
we
be
could start
titled
with
leaders.
80 for Brady at this point.
Yeah, they could be
That
the
was a
title
joke.
leaders, but they don't necessarily have to be the titled leaders who are the culture creators. So you hang with me in the conversation for a moment, because one of the topics that's come up in the last few years, especially since the pandemic, is that there's been this shift in many volunteer supported organizations, and how much AUW experienced some of that shift since the pandemic and after the pandemic.
The in-person thing was a big part of our culture. And now we do many things on Zoom, which are nice because you don't have to drive at night. But I think there's something very, very valuable about having in-person interactions and activities. So.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. I know that nothing yet in the virtual space has taken the place of being in the same room at the same time as another individual or group of individuals. So nothing like live interaction to me, but yet I've gotten really comfortable in the Zoom space in the last number of years. I've been doing virtual facilitation for about 14 years now. So I've gotten pretty comfortable right here. Here's the truth, is that a lot of organizations saw a significant shift, maybe even a downturn in their volunteer engagement during and after the pandemic. And here's my theory on this, is that I think that the appetite for volunteers at large, volunteers, they no longer have an appetite for the traditional approach of they show up and then they're good soldiers and they're told to do whatever the organization needs and they willingly do it, and then they go on about their way. I believe that the collective appetite of society has lessened in that, and instead I do think that engaged volunteers, people who genuinely want to have their heart fulfilled in some way, they want to have their passion stirred by their volunteer work. I think that those are the volunteers who are still every bit as engaged as they were, maybe even more so, since the pandemic timeframe. So the organizations that are figuring out how to make this shift, how to say, hey, maybe now is the time to get to a different place in the way that we engage our volunteers and the way that we care for them and feed them and nurture them and make sure that what's going on in their heart is at the pinnacle of the way that we engage them. When we're doing that, then we see that our volunteer involvement goes up. So that's what organizations are seeing, and I've kept my thumb on that pulse for the last couple of years. It's still an evolving story, but yeah, the early indicators say that organizations that are figuring out how do we embed this idea into their culture, they're able to sustain engagement and even attract new volunteers. And I love to keep this thing nearby because every time I'm on a plane and Hedda, I was staying in an Airbnb in your lovely city less than a week ago. I was on the corner of 26th and Q was where my Airbnb was in Sacramento. But I flew back, and every time I'm on an airplane and I watch our flight attendants go through all of their pre-flight announcements, this thing reminds me of what leaders must do. So what am I referring to? What is mentioned in those pre-flight announcements that could serve as a meaningful metaphor for leadership?
Put your own mask on first.
Ah, thank you, Doreen. Yes. Yes, I smirk a little bit every time I hear a flight attendant say that over the intercom, because it is a reminder to us as leaders that got to take care of ourselves first before we're in a good position to take care of others, which means that we should be asking ourselves these questions too, asking ourselves these why questions and making sure that what we're doing right now within the organization is feeding our passions, feeding our soul in a meaningful way, providing that fulfillment for us. Because people think that there's some magic formula to avoiding burnout. There isn't. It's a really simple equation. What we do is we just make sure that whatever it is that we're doing still brings meaning to us. And if it doesn't, then we talk about it. We bring it up. We see what other options might be available within the organization to make sure that those passion fires still burn. So again, I'm going to stop, see if there's questions in the chat box, see if there's any other thoughts or questions that the group would like to explore. Gail, go ahead. We're not able to hear you, Gail.
I know, I'm sorry. My space bar quit working. Okay, so one of my favorite quotes is, of course, Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they will always remember how you made them feel. So, you know, when we have new people visit, we have to make them feel good, or even the people that keep working and working and working and doing so much, you have to make them feel good too. You do special little things for new people, for the people that have been around for a while. That's so important.
Yeah, Gail, and it's so beautiful to hear you say that. In my professional life, so what I do right now, I serve on professional staff for my collegiate fraternity. And one of the things that I get to do, Gail, is I get to remind 19 and 20-year-old men that they have an equal responsibility to make 40 and 50 and 60 and 70 and 80-year-old men feel wanted and included and feel like they belong as they attempt to engage their alumni in their chapters. And it's often an epiphany for our young men to realize that that is a universal need that we all share. It doesn't matter what age you are or where you are, what stage in life. We all want to feel like we belong. We all want to feel like we're wanted and we're included in some way. And Gail, when you mentioned that, it's a beautiful reminder that, yeah, that's what we should be doing within your organizations as well. And Sharon, go ahead.
Okay, so in the chat, someone has asked, how do we shift the culture when it is not so welcoming? And then continuing with this problem, the bigger problem, according to someone else, is getting people to join, not necessarily to participate. So those dovetail.
All right. Well, your first question, and whoever is asking that sure is the magic question. And I know that in my early conversations with some of the influencers who I've been partnering with, and we've been sharing in beautiful conversations for maybe 2 months or more now. I'm not even sure what the time frame is, because they've just been so fluid and so thoughtful. But it is the magic question: is how do we do this? How do we shift as a culture? Well, my answer is going to seem really simple compared to the hard work that it's going to take to actually make it happen. But how you do it is by intention, by coming up with a plan to be intentional about the way that we choose to engage with others. And then, just like I remind the young men who I work with, the collegiate men, who may feel a little awkward engaging in conversation with a 60 or a 70 or an 80-year-old man, I say, well, there's no magic way to get beyond that momentary discomfort. You just got to get out and do it. So that's the same answer that I'm going to offer to the organization, is that we have to be intentional about it. You have to actually want to do this. And then after the want is there, the desire is there, that we can continue to walk together to be able to really come up with some actionable plans that would help this culture to come alive for your organization. And Sharon, can you hit me with the second question again?
So the question was that it's harder to get people to join, not so much, the bigger problem is getting people to join rather than to participate.
And how do we
to that?
Go ahead.
That was the gist of it.
That was my comment, and I think I meant it as the bigger problem is getting people to join and to participate. I think if somebody joins, I mean, we have members who don't come to meetings or events, so they don't,
But at least they pay dues.
Yeah, but that's not going to help keep the organization alive.
So Sandra, the challenge that you're describing is not unique. Again, it's some of the conversations that I even have in my own professional work on a daily basis. And for me, it does go back to those conversations. It is finding out what was their original why for joining. And if they had the opportunity, if they had the bandwidth in their life, what would they want to do? What would bring meaning to them? In what ways would they want to apply their skills and their gifts? Or what area would they like to grow and develop? Maybe it's not something that they've done before, but they would like to. So there's lots of different ways that we could approach that, but I do believe that it comes down to the conversations. Now, will that engage 100% of your membership in the work of your organization? Maybe not, but I believe that it can elevate the percentage just by having the conversation, just by asking, because often what we hear in those moments is that, nobody ever bothered to ask me that question before. And for me, that's a beautiful moment to be able to say, well, I'm asking now. Let's talk about it. So Joanne, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that one of the important things in AAUW or any organization is that you have a system of ways for people to communicate to each other. As membership, we just put together a what we called a meet up with new members that were invited and board who got together one afternoon and we talked about what's available and how we all participated in those things. People were talking so much. I had a bell with me to try to ring it and stop people talking so that we could go to the next topic. And it was hard to get them to stop talking to each other. And at the end, we had like an hour and a half, I think. At the end, I kept saying, you know, this meeting is over. And they just kept talking. But what happened is everybody at that meeting had an opportunity to express themselves about how they felt. And I think the same thing happens with when you have interest groups and they start getting involved in something, knitting groups, crocheting groups. I mean, things that are just for someone to enjoy, a hobby or whatever. And I think it's that interpersonal connection. At one point, we had something called Gal Pals. So when a new member hit the, I guess the board started joined, they were assigned to another person who would pick them up to go to meetings, call them to see what was going on and to tell them about it. We had one person recently who said she'd been in the group for like 2 years. She happened to be a neighbor of mine. And when I got the membership role here, she joined our book club called Wine and Crime. Just different things that get their interest going. We have some now, some of the younger groups are doing, what do you call it? In the evenings, they'll have a get together to read a book or to drink wine or to go to another, not a bar necessarily, but that kind of thing. And that's I think connecting our members a lot more.
Yeah,
A structure.
Yeah, but that idea of connection, it is important to all of us. It's important to humanity, and certainly as we talk about serving through an organization, it's an important part of the volunteer experience as well. Peggy, what would you add?
I was just going to ask actually a question, Barry. You've been doing this work for some time and you've talked about how, you know, it can take a while to get things moving with a culture change. On the other hand, I am wondering if you have seen any success in the short term.
Yeah, you're right. And that culture shift may be one of the most difficult ventures to take on because organizations tend to live by Newton's laws. And if they're in motion, they tend to stay in motion. But if they're at rest, they tend to stay at rest. So being able to crank up an organization and get it to shift in a different direction and to take a fresh look at its own culture it's a pretty difficult thing to do. Yes, again, because I do real-time study with the 26 organizations that I support in my professional role, and I'm watching where organizations are pivoting. So these are chapters of collegiate men who are steeped in traditions and often aren't even aware of the resources that are placed right in front of them. But yet I'm watching some beautiful examples of chapters as large as 130 men who are pivoting on a dime. You would think that they would be shifting and turning like a cruise ship, whether they're shifting and turning more like a speedboat. So that I'm watching some real-time examples of this, and it really just takes the catalyst of a group of leaders. And it doesn't always mean that the group of leaders needs to have a title. It just means that they're influential within the organization and they believe in moving in a common direction. and they're willing to put in the sweat equity to make it happen. So yes, I do see, I am seeing it right now in my professional life. I've seen it in organizations of many different types, volunteer supported. And it's a beautiful thing when it happens, but sadly, it's more rare than common because it does take those catalysts to really put in the hard work, the good work.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Peg, what would you add? Close us out in our conversation.
Well, one thing is we had a volunteer or a person who had been a member paying dues only and maybe in a book group for 25 years and then asked to step up, and she is thrilled. And she's one of the best volunteers we have. The second thing was we started a copy and conversation group whose agenda excluded being asked that you would do anything. No one was allowed to ask you to do anything, and everybody's tense shoulders just relaxed. And out of that has come a lot of new members.
So yeah, I do like that pressure-free environment because again, there are different schools of thought in this, and I think that there's truth to all of them. Many organizations will believe that they get more volunteers to step up only because we bother to ask them. And then there are others that don't want to be asked, but instead want to just find their own way and just fumble and stumble their way, like that 25-year person that we just heard described. So yeah, I don't know what the right answer is, and it may be a combination of those for all of your groups. But I do know this is that, and this is the way that I love to close out our sessions, is engagement. It happens one person at a time. So there is no macro answer. There really is a never-ending string of micro answers, because we have to have those conversations and find out what stirs in the heart of every unique individual who may choose to serve alongside your organization. So ladies, it's been a blessing for me to be able to share a couple thoughts and to engage in conversation with you. If the group will have me back, I'd love to dig in a little bit deeper and walk alongside the organization. But I'll leave that up to you. I'm just grateful that we've had this time together.
Thank you, Barry. That was very enlightening and very involving. I think we got a lot of people thinking about how their branches can be improved, how they can improve their relationship with their members, and how they can engage more people. But thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you in session 2. We want to remind everybody this was recorded. So all of our branch development peer group meetings are recorded. Links can be found on our webpage, and more information about the branch development committee is also on our webpage. Our next peer group meeting is going to be a little bit off schedule because Barry is a very busy guy. And so it will be on Thursday, April 4th, again at 7 p.m. And we'll be continuing our series with Barry and talking more about touching the heart of our volunteers. Wanted to thank everyone for participating this evening. We hope to see you again soon, and we encourage you to tell your branch leaders about this program and our upcoming month's topics and speakers. And it might be a good branch board exercise to look a little bit at this video if members of your branch board have not been here this evening. But thank you very much. Also, read in our branch board-to-board newsletter every month, and you'll see what's happening in branch development, including membership and branch support and leadership training. So thank you very, very much to everyone for being with us tonight, and have a very good evening.
I
Thanks,
want you
everyone.
to note that in the chat, There was a comment that said, "Thank you, it was wonderful and informative." In addition, our branch development committee email alias is in the chat for those of you who want to reach out and speak to any of us.
Right. And that goes to us and we get the message and we will contact you, email or phone if you give us your number. But we're always available to help with any questions or problems that arise in your branch. But thank you again for participating tonight. Have a great evening, everybody. Bye-bye. Sharon, are you still with us?
I don't think so.
No, okay.
I see Gail.
Hi.
I think it's just Gail and Marcia and I. Okay, great.
So how did you feel about it?
Well, it was interesting. We got 43 people to attend, and in the last at 8:25, we still had 31 people. So and it started to drop off right at 8 o'clock after an hour. So pretty much people have stayed with it. I'm sure a few people, this wasn't even remotely what they were expecting. And so, you know, they're going to be gone and then they won't be back either. But, you know, they were expecting perhaps a rah-rah session of here's the magic bullet. Put this in your gun and you too will have a complete nominating slate by Tuesday.
My feeling is the good ideas came from the members, not from Barry.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. He's got an interesting book. Well, when he was going through his points, I kept trying to find them in the book and I finally gave up. So I was glad I was taking notes. I don't know. He has ideas, but what's the level I want to call it? They're on a much higher level than those of us in the trenches, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh, and one of the things we're going to try to do, and I sent a note off to Dawn, I know they're leaving on vacation tomorrow, is we want to tie all of these ideas back to Dawn's famous video of the care and feeding of volunteers, because
I have to watch that. Okay.
It's really good. And it has some
It's very good.
concrete ideas. And then also tie it back to Sharon's leadership development toolkit so that we can say, here's why, you know, that's what to do, you know, here's why you want to do it and how you want to do it. And I think everything we've put together in the past really relied so much on command and control and not about, you know, let the ducklings lead. You know, somebody I once worked with said, "There go my people. I must hurry to catch up with them."
Yeah, and I think it all boils down to that quote I said. You know, it's how you make people feel. They're going to forget what you said. They're going to forget what you did, unless part of that was making them feel bad. They're going to remember how they felt.
They remember that. Yeah.
That is so true.
I sent my whole board a Galentine and they were blown away, you know, and it cost me $5 or something. I mean, it's just, you got to do stuff. Now, if I were in person, I could have handed it to them. Unfortunately, I had to mail them all, but I don't know. But thank you guys. I'll let you go.
Okay.
I enjoyed it.
Well, if you hear any feedback, because your branch covers such a wide area and a lot of duplicates, let us know what you're hearing, because that would be very helpful.
I didn't see a lot of people from my branch, to be honest.
Oh, really?
I was looking at the names.
Yeah, there was no one from my branch but me, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I hope is that we can raise the energy level a little bit. It was
It was
I
a
don't know,
little
I
too
think we-
chilled. Yeah.
it was a little slow.
You know
So
what?
I don't know.
You could
Go ahead.
add little questions, little polls. That always raises an energy
Oh,
level.
in the middle of it?
But anywhere where
Yeah.
like he asked, he could, instead of him saying, what do you think about this? And everybody says nothing, there could be a question that has multiple choices, and then we vote, we pick our favorite one, and then it comes up and says, okay,
Yeah.
50% said this, it's just a more interesting.
Right. It's real easy to do in a webinar format.
Oh,
It
that's
is
right. Well, no, you can
so-
do it on a call. I've been on calls that weren't webinars that you can do it.
Okay. Yeah. Sandy sent me the instructions and my eyes rolled back in my head.
Well, I'd be glad to learn it if you want help. So just send me the instructions. I'll let you guys go. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, bye,
Thanks.
Gail.
Good night.
Night.
Well, I'm pretty pooped, but maybe the three of us can get together and talk about this like Thursday sometime.
Yeah, we could, let's see, Thursday. We could do the Thursday morning thingy. What do you
Okay.
think?
Let me look at my calendar. I have a dentist appointment. I think it's tomorrow. Yeah, I have a dentist appointment tomorrow. Thursday, I'm wide open.
Okay, so let's tentatively set it for the usual time, 10 o'clock. And
Okay.
I'll contact Sharon. She was on
Okay.
a half-day Zoom with the
Oh,
Tech Trek Monterey Bay whole
yeah.
thing. She's
burned out.
wasted.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's burned
Yeah.
out. But I'll send her a
Okay.
note tomorrow. Okay.
Thursday
Thanks.
sounds good. All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.